Item number 2A, Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do have our finance team with us here this evening. We have our Director of Finance, Peter Privatera, and we have Lisa Newton and Patty Lewis with us as well. And do want to start by saying, we've been through many budget deliberations over the last 6 weeks or so. Following the presentation of the town manager's budget, we've had 5 standing committee meetings where each of our departments met with the council to discuss their budgets. Appreciate all of the work that went into those meetings. Directors felt very supported by the town council with the work that they're doing and their requests moving forward into fiscal year 24. In addition to that, we had a joint, or the council, I should say, had a joint Board of Education and Town Council meeting or meeting with the Finance Committee from the Board of Education. So a total of 6 meetings spanning dozens of hours of work that has gone into our proposed budget. And next Tuesday, the 25th, the Town Council will vote on the budget. I did want to share some information with you this evening regarding some changes that we are proposing to make with the original proposed budget. You may recall that we had 2 police officers, 1 fire inspector, and then 1 librarian, 2, that we were proposing to use ARPA funds to add those positions. The librarian, as we know, is a position that had been vacated prior to the pandemic. And, through the pandemic, with the services that the library was providing, they were able to work without that librarian position. Now, as we're moving further away from the pandemic and getting back to close to where we were pre-pandemic in terms of our residents accessing library services, they expressed a need to add that position back in. So it's been allocated all of this time, it just has not been funded. The fire inspector is a need that has been expressed by our fire chief for a number of years now. Certainly the need is there as we are bringing more housing units onto our rolls. Currently that's already been approved by the council and more that is coming. We are looking at over 1,500 new units being added to the town over the course of the next 24 months or so. The need has been there and it's just continuing to rise in terms of the need of that position within the fire department, providing fire inspection services to our community. And then our 2 police officers is a need that we discussed during our Public Safety Committee meeting. Certainly the numbers this year are up across the board in terms of traffic enforcement, motor vehicle violations, arrests overall. Police department does, as we know, an outstanding job of protecting our community. And everything we do, we've talked about this, without keeping everyone safe, we aren't the town that we are. We aren't the school district we are without having those outstanding public safety services. So, as we're expanding Trout Brook Trail, and that's becoming a linear park, we're going to need to step up public safety on that trail. And as, again, back to the density of the addition of residential units in town, we see that increasing the need for 2 additional police officers being added because of those needs. Certainly, Yukon is a far way from being in front of the council, but, based on some of the proposals that we've seen from the developer that have been before DRAC, informally, but is on the record where, you may have an additional, again, it's premature to maybe even say this, but could have an additional 1,000 new people living on that campus, and that's significant, and will bring a a public safety need to do so. So what we have done here is taking those positions and added them back into the general fund, which would have an increase on our expenses. However, we have some offsets and revenue that we're pleased to discuss tonight to increases in revenues to help offset that increase in those four positions. So under miscellaneous revenue at the top, you can see there's $111,184. That's a reimbursement from the capital account that's tied directly back to the Brixton Oakwood Avenue purchase that was approved by the council not too long ago. A telephone grant, a small grant of $5,365 that was received. Delamar lease repayment increase that totaled an additional $19,692. We've looked at the activity that's been approved by the council, and activity that's coming soon. We've took another look at our building permit revenue numbers and have increased those modestly by $50,000. And then with the additional fire inspector, we do envision an increase in revenues tied to that under fire plan reviews of $13,340 for an additional increase in subtotal revenues of $199,581. So we did, when we set the mill rate every year, we start with a gross grand list number, and we back out certain numbers from that gross number, and we'll look at senior citizen tax incentives, veteran tax incentives. Another number we had in there was the Board of Assessment Appeals reserve that we established, and we're able to, based on the work that has occurred over the last, since the budget has been presented back in early March, we have since completed that process and are able to reduce the reserve from $5.7 million down to just about $1 million, $938,000. In total revenue from everything that I just mentioned, in addition to the Board of Assessment Appeals, results in an increase of $440,000 to offset the police regular payroll, fire regular payroll, library regular payroll, and then the Social Security and benefits tied to each of those positions. We're also recommending, and we discussed this briefly in our, I forget which committee meeting it came up in, Mr. Chairman, but it was a question that you had asked about the interval house.
We had a couple meetings about that. We had the presentation from Interval House, and then we had a recent, I think it was in our last meeting prior to the last one, the first finance meeting that we had, we talked about that.
Okay. Passing around some information right now that was shared with us from the Interval House in terms of municipal funding that various communities are providing Interval House. And you can see, we have Hartford, Manchester, East Hartford, West Hartford, and you can go all the way down the line, right down the line to Andover. You can see that Hartford is providing $65,000 in funding to Interval House, and however, they do service a tremendous amount of clients in Hartford. But looking down, you can see and this is somewhat dated, but it's on average back in 21-22 is 188 clients. The council generously provides $2,850 to Interval House, and we are recommending that we would move that up to $10,000 with this budget. So we've added that $7,100 increase into the expenditure adjustment for the upcoming fiscal year. But you can see, you can compare us to some other notable communities around, in and around Hartford County, and you can see, in our opinion, we had been taking advantage of a great benefit that's provided by Interval House. Probably could have looked at making this adjustment in the past, but we are offering that in this proposed budget without moving the mill rate that's been proposed going back to early March. So, so those are the expenditure adjustments. And then if you go down below, you can see that we've reduced the ARPA contribution resolution that was originally proposed of $432,000. We do have a couple of ARPA capital resolutions that we will need the council's authorization to take advantage of fairly shortly, so we'll mention those this evening. They're not anything new. These items have been discussed in the past, although not formally approved yet. We had talked about doing a crash study, which was in the original ARPA list of items that we were going to bring to the council, and we have since modified that request to include Vision Zero. So everyone knows we are in the throes of working on an action plan. We had our third meeting, Vision Zero task force meeting this evening. We did hire a consultant to work with us, so we're going through that contract negotiation process right now. FHI, they have joined us. They joined us at tonight's meeting, and they joined us last month's meeting as well. So, but we would, our next meeting is May 22nd. Would love to bring a resolution forward to the council to approve that expenditure. They're going to be incredibly invaluable to the work that we're doing as a task force. They already are, and they're just kind of in an informal role working with the task force tonight, and as I said back in February as well. So, so that would be one resolution. The other one is LaSalle Road reconstruction. So as you know, we are in the tail end of the center infrastructure master plan project that's been going on. That's been being run by our consultant, Stantec, and we are in the design stage right now. We'll be coming forward to community planning and economic development and public works facilities, sustainability committees to start to talk through what some of those designs look like, but we will have to appropriate CIP funds to move forward with that project. So the plan now would be to continue with the design and go forward with the construction this time next year, starting on LaSalle and then Farmington Avenue the following year. So this would just be for LaSalle for the current CIP. The other item within the CIP that came up during budget deliberations and in committee work was some of the work that we were exploring with Rockledge Golf Club. So I know we had requested an appropriation within the CIP of $700,000. Is that the exact dollar amount? So we've been, working with Leisure Services, working with our golf pro, working with our golf superintendent to look at repurposing potentially the driving range that exists today to take advantage of potentially more revenues. So we have a driving range. I think we on average are bringing in around $50,000-$60,000 in revenue at the driving range. It is, when you compare us to a neighboring driving range, and the one that we refer to often as Stanley, it's our driving range is quite underutilized in comparison to Stanley. Stanley's bringing in almost $500,000 in revenue to their driving range. They've made some changes to their driving range. Any golfers who may have visited over there can see what they've done in terms of expanding what they offer. So they have their heated range bays, so you can use it all winter long. They also have top top tracer technology within the bays. So, and the golfer has a totally different experience when they're utilizing the range there. And those are the kinds of things that we would look to do with our capital improvement plan funds. We would not move forward in any way until we come back to committee. But with the current budget, we would, like to keep that $700,000 in there. We are in the process of forming a golf ledge driving range advisory committee, so to speak, task force, for lack of a better word. This group would be comprised of members of the women's golf club over at Rockledge, members of the men's club. Our golf superintendent would certainly be part of that committee, as well as the golf pro and others. And we will look at, we're already doing research in terms of what this technology looks like around the country and around the region, what kind of revenues we can expect from making these kinds of changes. And then through the work of that committee, we would come back to our Human and Leisure Services Committee and present a more of a formal plan for consideration, and then potentially be looking to put something, put a construction plan together for the fall. We did increase the revenues in the Leisure Services Department to considering some. So we assumed we'd have a half a year of utilization, so pretty much next February, maybe January, February, March, April, May, June. So we did increase the revenues by we think a conservative $150,000 for those several months of utilization with the new driving range. So that's I know something that did come up during deliberation, something, we would ask that remains with that work that would lead up to kind of a more formal presentation to the council through standing committee work and for your consideration at that time. If the decision is made not to do that, then we would just repurpose those funds. We have plenty of other things that we can repurpose that $700,000 for through the CIP. So, with that, I will pause. I just gave you a lot of information there, but through you, Mr. Chairman, turn it back to you and the council.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith, and I also appreciate the mayor's efforts on a lot of these changes here and suggestions, as well as the rest of the council. Well, I'll just go in reverse, so we'll just go on the points you were making about the golf course. Appreciate those taking into consideration of the comments. I also want to give credit to Councilman Zdanowicz, who has also been very interested in this and given us some on-site photographs of what's happening, live inspections of the Stanley Golf Course from Councilman Zdanowicz. But I think there's two parts to this. One, I love the idea that's never been in doubt. I think that what we are trying to do with Stanley is replicate something that they did half in. They did a full redo of Stanley. Like they had they reimagined what they wanted to do there. And I think that is something that we have been talking about in human services for a long period of time. So I don't think you have a lack of interest in making an investment in Rockledge. I think it's a lack of understanding what some folks want to suggest how we move forward on this. And I would suggest that we go big, because it is, as anyone who's ever tried to play there, it is impossible to play there because people want to, and because the staff there does an amazing job of preserving the place. But I would suggest that if we are going to take a big holistic approach, that it includes the restaurant, the outside vendor as well. And then, my biggest question in investing in the driving range is, how do we connect that to the current golf, to the pro shop, because that is a substantial amount of space between the two. And that is one of the major issues, I think, of why it doesn't do well, is because of the connectivity with the rest of the facility is really far off. But I'd love to kind of have an understanding of that, and I appreciate you saying that they will come and present that to us as we move forward. But I think that's got to be a big piece to it. It can't just be investment here. I think if we're going to do it, we should just make one large investment and, making that. I think the underlying thing has to be that this is a long-term sustainable thing that will make the golf course profitable, which it has lacked. It has not been able to do over the last decade or so. But with that,
One other point, Peter just pointed this out to me. I just wanted to highlight the bottom of the spreadsheet. So the Board of Education did add an additional $183,000 to the budget last week that they adopted. So that's not included in this. So
Yep.
we would have to make a cut to.
that was going to be my.
Okay.
I had a general question in that realm as well. So I believe in the past there have been the establishment of non-lapsing accounts for the Board of Ed. And it would allow them to carry over any non-budgeted, what is it, revenue?
Surplus.
Yeah. Is that something that we can look at potentially?
We certainly could, yeah. So we still have, the account is active. There's nothing in it, so there's a zero balance today, but we could discuss that with, with Liz Hewitt and Andy Morrow, and look at moving their surplus into that account at the end of the year to use for whatever they feel is appropriate, whether it's a position, the STEM position, or pay for play, or whatever it might be. They'd have the discretion to use that surplus for those purposes.
Yeah, that'd be helpful to have an idea of what that looks like,
Yeah.
Because that might be helpful.
Sure.
With that, any questions from other Councilman Zdanowitz?
Thank you. Through you. Rick, you talked about the regular payroll for the police and the fire, and even the librarian, but really don't know that. But police and fire, at least in the minimum, have a lot of overtime. How do they account for the potential overtime for that as well in the budget?
So I'll let Peter handle most of that. In terms of the fire inspector, I don't think you'll see, fire inspectors generally will not come in for overtime unless they're going to at fire. So even if we pull out the budget, we looked at the dollar amount that's associated with inspection division, I can't imagine it's a very large number. And then for police?
Pete Privatera, Finance Director. Public safety overtime has always been a challenge. What we try to do is we try to put the minimum amount that we feel is reasonable in their overtime account, and then supplement that with any payroll savings we generate during the course of the year. When we add a position, we do not normally add a component for overtime. We'll manage the overtime account. I think every time that I've gone to this, to Finance Committee to report on the monthly status, there's always been a deficit in the overtime account, but we've always been able to manage that with payroll savings from vacancies and other savings in other accounts. So that's why we're not showing any overtime, because frankly, I wouldn't even know what amount to put in here for overtime. But I feel confident that we could manage 2 more positions on overtime.
Councilwoman Poland?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this. Just a question for clarification. Near the top, under the reserve adjustments, it says reduce reserve from 5.7 million to 938,580. But then the savings is 240,000 instead of what I would have expected to see, which is like 4.7 million. So can you help explain that? Thank you.
Certainly.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn it over to Mr. Privatera.
It's not, oh, there we go. The $5.7 million is property value. It's net assessed value. So when you take the net assessed value and you multiply it times the mill rate, that's where you get the revenue amount. So it's, it's, if you divide the 5.7 million by 1,000, multiply it times the mill rate, that's where you get the adjustment. When we calculate the mill rate, there are certain adjustments, certain reserves that we set aside, reserves for elderly credits. Since this is still a quote-unquote reval year, we have to set aside a significant amount for tax appeals and disputed assessments. We set aside a value. We reduce the grand list by that value because we have to ensure that if we do have to make those adjustments, we'll still have sufficient revenue to basically cover the budget. I get these numbers from the assessor based on historical information. Last year, the number was very high. It was close to $5 million. And I think that, when he gave me that number, he thought there still might be a significant amount of adjustments that were to be made, but the Board of Assessment Appeals ruled out roughly $4.5 million of those. So that's where now we can tax on that amount, and that's where the additional revenue comes from.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
very helpful.
Madam Mayor?
So I just wanted to say thank you. There was a concern with putting positions that were built into the system. And what I want to highlight, as Peter just explained, that this is not a one-time revenue. This is an ongoing revenue of grand list. Will be at this amount, and this will be built into our budget and not dig a hole. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Looking like there aren't any other questions. Hold on, I have to flip back to my agenda here.
I think there's one
I got it here, yeah. With that, I don't see any other questions. Without one more?
So, no, I would just say that we have to set the mill rate, and we have to adopt it, and there's a lot of preparation that the town staff needs, and maybe you can talk about. So whatever changes might be suggested, we were hoping that would be tonight. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion that happened behind the scenes on this paper, but if there's any other items, I would encourage any of us, all of us, to raise it to the town manager and Peter and his staff, so Lisa and Patty, to make sure that we can understand what that means to the budget. We can't just say lower it by 1%. We need to understand, or, what that means. So, anyway, so I would encourage that. And then when would you say that the latest you need to?
Well, I wish Gina were here right now, because every time we make a move, we always have to check with Gina. I know that the titles have been posted. We'll have to submit a substitute appropriation ordinance. The tax levy ordinance, if additional changes were made that were not offset by revenue, that would require a new tax levy resolution. So, if there was any action on the capital budget, then we would have to do a new capital authorization ordinance. So, right now, all these changes are built in, and the mill rate is not impacted, and the budget's up $440,000. We know what to expect. But if there are any additional changes on top of that, then we'd like to have the documents ready in hand as soon as possible. So I would say, within a couple days, if that's possible. This way, we'd make sure that we'd have them checked and rechecked, and Gina won't be upset with me. So.
Thank you, and thank you guys for the work tonight. Thank you for putting this together. I think we look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday, and without objection, I'll close the meeting.
So I'm going to oversimplify it, and because I kind of remember something like